Hey friends, we need to talk about the toxic shit happening inside the coaching industry. This is going to feel real spicy to some of y'all, but we have a responsibility to uphold for our students, participants, clients, and um, it's it needs to be talked about. If you don't know who I am, hi, I'm Randi. I am the founder and CEO of I Need a Clone Consulting. We are a bookkeeping and consulting firm for small businesses. And I have been at this entrepreneur game for over 14 years, running a successful business, starting from the ground up. And so I've been in a lot of coaching containers and I've also led coaching containers. And so I just have a lot to say about it right now because the coaching industry is feeling really, really freaking toxic right now. And there's a lot of people that could do a lot of good for a lot of people. So I want to sort of clear some things up. First, if you are able to open someone up, that does not mean that you know how to hold them. And if you are a coach, a healer, a mentor, a guide, a facilitator, a spiritual teacher, or anyone leading people into transformational work, then that distinction is important. So I'm not talking specifically about business containers where all you're doing is executing work and all you're doing is like, creating business plans and strategies and all that. I'm talking about when you're doing the deeper emotional internal work because all of this is so important. We're in a time when the coaching industry is full of people promising transformation, deep transformation, embodied transformation, soul level transformation, nervous system healing, inner child healing, subconscious reprogramming, conscious creation, quantum leaps, breakthroughs, becoming your highest self, stepping into the next version of yourself. And all of that work is so beautiful and it is so needed. All of that work is powerful and can be deeply, deeply supportive in your life, in your journey as an entrepreneur, and in your journey as a human being. So, I want to say this first. I believe in coaching, I believe in mentorship, I believe in healing work, I believe in transformation, I believe in spaces where people are held and witnessed and challenged and expanded and supported into becoming the version of themselves that they came here to be. But I also believe that we need to talk about the toxic shit happening inside the coaching industry because people are getting hurt. And sometimes the people doing the harm are the very same people talking about how harmful the coaching industry is. They are the ones saying, well, I'm not like those other coaches. They're the ones calling out toxic coaching. They're the ones talking about nervous system safety, conscious creation, sisterhood, integrity, emotional responsibility, and holding sacred space. And then they turn around and recreate the same harm inside their own containers. And that's what needs to be talked about. So, this video, before I go any further, I should tell you that this video was inspired by a personal experience that I had recently inside a coaching container that left me feeling deeply harmed, unsupported, and honestly shocked by the lack of care around what had been opened. So I won't name the person and I'm not going to name the program. And I'm not going to share any identifying details because that's not the point of this video. This is not about calling out one coach. It's about calling up a much bigger conversation. Because when someone brings you into a coaching container and guides you into vulnerable personal work and opens trauma adjacent material and uncovers deep wounds and then mishandles the container, that does harm. And if we are going to build businesses around transformation, we need to be willing to talk about the responsibility that comes with that. Because a coaching container is not just a Zoom link and a transformation promise. It's an agreement. It's a leadership agreement. It's an energetic agreement. It's a relational agreement. And if you are the one leading the space, you are responsible for defining the space. Your client, your student, the participant who came in trusting you, they are not the ones responsible for defining the space. You are the coach, the facilitator, the guide, the person who said, come into the space because I can hold this. That responsibility belongs to you. So before anybody intentionally misunderstands me, I want to be very clear. I am not saying that a coach is responsible for healing every wound that a client has ever held or has ever carried. I'm not saying a coach is responsible for someone else's entire trauma history. That's ridiculous. I am not saying that coaches have to tolerate boundary violations or disrespect or interruptions or unsafe behavior or anything else that genuinely harms the container. And I'm not saying that a client can never be removed from a program either. I'm not saying any of that. What I am saying is that if you are going to guide people into vulnerable places, you need to know what happens after they get there. If you are going to open people up, you need to know how to hold them. If you are going to touch trauma, childhood wounds, grief, sexual trauma, relationship wounds, money wounds, visibility wounds, or deep subconscious material, you need to understand that you are not just playing with content. You are touching people's lives. You're touching their nervous systems. You're touching stories they may have never said out loud before. You are touching tender material that may have been buried for years. And you cannot use trauma as a doorway and then abandon people in the room. That is not transformation. That is not ethical leadership. That is not conscious coaching. That's not holding space. That is harm. And I know this sounds really strong here, but I mean it because being good at cracking someone open does not automatically mean you are good at holding what comes out. There are coaches who are so gifted. They can lead a powerful meditation. They can ask the one question that brings someone to tears. They can say the thing that cuts straight through all the ego noise. They can guide someone into an old memory. They can help someone access a buried truth. They can create a moment that feels really profound. But intensity is not the same thing as integration. Intensity is not the same thing as integration. Having someone in tears does not automatically mean healing. Sometimes tears mean healing, but sometimes tears just mean release. Sometimes having someone cry means that they finally feel safe enough to let something move. But sometimes tears mean that someone has been exposed. And sometimes a breakthrough is not really a breakthrough yet. It's just a wound that has been opened. And if there is no integration and no grounding and no follow-up and no clarity and no repair and no sense of what happens next, that person can leave feeling more raw, more vulnerable, more destabilized, and more alone than when they arrived. That is why depth without structure in your container is not safe. I will say that again. Depth without structure in your coaching container is not safe. And I think that this is where a lot of coaches get it wrong because they want depth. They want powerful testimonials. They want people crying on their calls. They want people saying, oh my God, I've never seen that before. They want the emotional intensity because emotional intensity can look like transformation. It can feel like the work is working. It can, create the appearance of success or the appearance of potency in your work. But a powerful moment is not the same thing as a safe container. A safe container requires more than your charisma. It requires more than your intuition, more than your beautiful sales page, more than being able to really read someone, more than your magical spiritual language. It requires more than saying, this is a sacred space. A safe container requires structure. It requires clarity and agreements and scope and boundaries and your emotional responsibility. It requires knowing what the fuck you are doing when something vulnerable comes up. And if you do not know what you are doing, then you need to know when to pause. You need to know when to get grounded. You need to know when to say, this may be outside the scope of what I can safely hold. You need to know when to refer someone to a licensed therapist or trauma-trained practitioner. That is not weakness, my friends. That is integrity. That is humility. And frankly, that is what makes you trustworthy. Because one of the most dangerous things is in this industry is a coach with a big gift and no humility. A coach who can see things clearly, but cannot see themselves. A coach who can guide someone else into their subconscious patterns, but refuses to examine and heal their own. A coach who talks about projection, but cannot recognize when they are projecting. A coach who talks about conscious creation, but cannot see the reality they are actively creating through their own fear, their own defensiveness, their own scarcity, their own unresolved wounds. That is where the danger is, because your language can be beautiful. Your concepts can be powerful. Your branding can be polished and pretty. Your program can sound really transformational, but if you cannot hold yourself, you cannot fully hold the room. And I want to talk about what a safe coaching container actually needs, especially if the work is going to go deep. Okay, so first, there needs to be confidentiality. If people are being invited to share vulnerable things, there needs to be a clear agreement that what is shared in the container stays in the container. This should not be assumed. It should be named. It should be spoken. It should be part of the agreement from the get-go. Because if someone is sharing about childhood wounds or trauma or grief or relationships, money, shame, fear, or anything deeply personal, they should not have to wonder afterward whether their story is floating around in someone else's conversation. That is basic care. Okay, second, there needs to be participation expectations. Trust me, if you lead, your clients are going to follow, but you got to lead. So, are people supposed to stay muted? Is the space conversational? Are participants allowed to respond to each other? Are side comments welcome? Is this a teaching container, a coaching container, a sharing circle, a mastermind, or a hybrid of some of those things? Are participants allowed to give feedback to each other? Or is only the coach supposed to give feedback? Can they bring in symbols, signs, synchronicities, intuitive hits? Or should all of that wait until the end or sometime later? Is there space for that? All of that needs to be clear, because confusion in the container creates conflict later. And leaders cannot set one tone on one call, shift the tone later, and then punish people for not magically knowing that the rules changed. That is not clean leadership. If you want the container to operate a certain way, define it. If expectations shift, name that. If someone is disrupting the space, address it clearly and respectfully. Do not let resentment build silently and then make a sudden unilateral decision while the other person is sitting there blindsided. That is not holding the container. That is avoiding an adult conversation. Okay. Third, there needs to be scope. What is your work? What is this work? Is it coaching? Is it consulting? Is it spiritual mentorship? Is it somatic work? Is it trauma healing? Is it subconscious reprogramming? Is it therapy adjacent? What are you trained to hold? What are you not trained to hold? That might be the more important question there. What are your limits? Because coaches are not therapists unless they are trained and licensed therapists. And this, I think, is one of the places where the coaching industry gets really fucking blurry. There are a lot of coaches doing deep emotional work without clearly naming that they are not therapists, without having trauma-informed training, without understanding nervous system activation, and without having a plan for what happens when someone's trauma comes to the surface. And listen, I am not saying coaches cannot support people through emotional material. I am not saying that every personal conversation has to happen with a therapist. No, I am not saying that coaches can't be wise, gifted, intuitive, or really helpful. But if you are going to lead people into early memories, sexual trauma, grief, family wounds, abandonment wounds, visibility wounds, money wounds, or anything else that lives in the body and the nervous system, then you need to understand the gravity of that. You need to understand that you are touching something sacred. You need to be honest about whether you are equipped to hold what you are opening. Fourth, there needs to be consent around deep exercises. Ooh, I cannot stress this enough. If you are about to guide someone into an exercise that may bring up childhood memories or trauma adjacent material, people deserve to know that first. Do not just shove them into it without warning. They deserve to know what kind of doorway they are walking through. They deserve to have the option to pause, to opt out, to modify, or to say, you know what, I am not available for this today. Because a lot of people in coaching containers are very trusting. They want to be good students. They want to surrender. They want to be coachable. They want to receive the work. So when the coach says, close your eyes and go back, they go back. And sometimes they end up somewhere they were not expecting. So that can be really powerful, but it can also be extremely destabilizing. So consent matters. Energetic consent, emotional, informed consent. A person should know when they're entering an exercise that could open up something tender. Fifth, there needs to be integration. Huge. This is so huge. This is so important. If a session brings up deep emotional material, what happens afterward? Is there grounding at the end? Is there journaling? Is there a check-in? Is there a reminder to drink water, to rest, to move gently, or to seek support? Is there a way to process what came up? Is there follow-up? Is there guidance around what to do if they feel raw or activated? Or does the call just end and everyone gets dumped back into their lives with their nervous systems wide open? Because that's not okay. Integration is where the healing actually starts to become embodied. So the breakthrough is not the whole thing. The tears, those aren't the whole thing. The realization, it's not the whole thing. The moment somebody says, "Oh my God, I see it now," that's not the end of the work. It's the beginning of a new relationship with that part of themselves. And if you opened it, you need to leave them with some way to hold it. Sixth, there needs to be a process for rupture and repair because things will happen. Somebody's going to say something that lands wrong. Somebody will interrupt. Somebody will misunderstand. Someone will get their feelings hurt. Somebody will cross a line. Somebody will trigger the coach. And the coach will trigger the client. This is human, especially in deep work. But what is important is what happens next. Is there a repair process? Is there a conversation? Is there a way to say, hey, this didn't feel good. Can we talk about it? Is there a way for the coach to check their own interpretation before acting on it? Is there room for clarification? Is there room for the participants to explain their intent? Is there room for the coach to say, hey, I noticed something and I want to understand it before I make a decision? That is what conscious leadership looks like. Conscious leadership is not never getting triggered. You're going to get triggered. But conscious leadership is knowing how to handle yourself when you are triggered. And if you are the leader of the container, you have a responsibility to pause before you turn your trigger into a decision or a weapon that impacts someone else's access, safety, or sense of belonging. Seventh, there needs to be a clean exit process. Okay, and this one's really important. Sometimes a person may need to leave a container. Sometimes the coach may need to remove somebody from the container because maybe it's not the right fit, or their behavior is disruptive, or there is no repair available. But if vulnerable work has already been opened, the exit process is so important. You do not just expose someone's trauma and then send a text message that basically says, you're out. No. Have a conversation, be an adult, name the issue clearly, give them a chance to understand what happened, give them a chance to repair if repair is appropriate. Remind them of confidentiality. Offer grounding or integration resources as they are leaving. Close that loop with respect. You are dealing with the sacred information and feelings and traumas and wounds of a human being. How you end a container is part of how you held it. I will say that again. How you end a container is part of how you held it. If your ending leaves someone feeling exposed, abandoned, punished, and alone with what you helped bring to the surface, then you did not hold the container well. I know this is so spicy for some of you, and I know it may make some of you uncomfortable, but that's good. We need to be uncomfortable with the places where the coaching industry has normalized harm. We need to be uncomfortable with the idea that powerful branding can cover sloppy facilitation. We need to be uncomfortable with the idea that your charisma can replace ethics. We need to be uncomfortable with the idea that just because you believe you're an intuitive person means you don't need structure in your container. No, 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 no. Intuition, spirituality, depth, good intentions, none of those are substitutes for responsibility, for consent, for safety, for impact. If you harm someone, the answer is not to say, well, my intention was pure, okay? And impact is important. If someone leaves your space feeling raw, abandoned, mischaracterized, or unsafe, you should care about that. No, you're not responsible for everyone's triggers. Every client's feelings don't necessarily mean that you did something wrong, but leadership requires the humility to ask, is there something that I need to see here? That's the piece that gets missed, I think. So many coaches teach self-responsibility. You know, they teach their clients to look at what they're creating. They teach people to examine their subconscious patterns. They teach people to stop projecting. They teach people to own their experience. All of that is beautiful, but are they doing that too? Are they asking, what did I create in this dynamic? Are they asking, what part of me got activated? Did I respond from leadership or from protection? Did I assume intent instead of asking for clarity? Did I hold the container or did I control it? Because there is a difference. Holding the container means creating safety, clarity, and integrity. Controlling the container means using your authority to protect yourself from discomfort. Those are not the same thing. And clients can feel the difference. Your participants, your audience, your students, they can feel the difference. So you might be able to spiritualize things, you may be able to justify things, you might be able to explain things in beautiful language, but people know when something has been handled cleanly and they know when it has not. Now, I also want to speak to the people who are clients, students, participants, and consumers of coaching, because this is important for you too. Please remember that you are allowed to ask questions before entering a deep coaching container. You are allowed to ask, what kind of work do we do here? What happens if trauma comes up? Is this space confidential? Are there group agreements? What is your training? What is your scope? How do you handle conflict? What happens if someone feels unsafe or activated? What support is available between calls? What happens if this isn't a good fit? Those are not annoying questions. They're intelligent questions, and they're self-honoring and self-protective questions. And if a coach that you're going to be working with gets offended by you asking about the safety of the container, that is information for you. If a coach cannot clearly explain the scope of their work, if a coach uses vague spiritual language instead of answering practical questions, that all of that is information. If a coach acts like questioning the container means that you are not in trust with the container, that is information. If a coach makes you feel like discernment is resistance, then that is information also. Please do not hand your deepest wounds to someone just because their branding feels magical. Please do not confuse intensity with safety, or being seen with being held, or, charisma with capacity to hold. Please don't confuse someone's gift with their integrity. A person can be gifted and still not safe for you. A person can be brilliant and still lack the structure to hold deep work. A person can give you a powerful breakthrough and still mishandle the aftermath. Both of those can be true, both things. And that's one of the hard things about this conversation, because it's rarely black and white. Sometimes the work helped you. Sometimes the person is really talented. Sometimes the session really was powerful. Sometimes you really did receive something valuable. And sometimes the container still was not safe. That's a hard truth to hold, but it's so important, because when we only look for obvious villains, we miss the more subtle harm. We miss the coach that says all the right things but cannot repair. We miss the program that feels magical but that has no agreements. We miss the facilitator who can create emotional intensity but cannot create integration. We miss the leader who speaks about consciousness but acts from unconscious wounds. And I don't want us to miss that anymore. I want us to become more discerning, not cynical. I want us to become discerning. There is a difference. Cynicism says, all coaches are toxic. But discernment tells us, okay, let me look for evidence of safety, integrity, structure, humility, and care. Cynicism tells you, I can't trust anyone. But discernment says, okay, trust is built through behavior. So cynicism closes your heart. Discernment protects your heart while keeping it open to what is real and true. That's what I want for us. Because I'm not here to burn down the coaching industry. I'm here to call it into maturity. I'm here to say that if we are going to do transformational work, we need to become the kind of leaders who can hold transformation responsibly, not just sell it or brand it or perform it, but really hold it. And holding it means we stop hiding behind the word container like it's a magical phrase that makes everything safe. Because a container is not safe just because you call it a container. It's safe because it has agreements, it has boundaries, it has confidentiality, it has repair, it has scope. A container is safe because the leader can regulate him or herself. A container is safe because the person holding it has the humility to say, you know what, I may need support here too. That is leadership. That's integrity. That is the kind of coaching industry I want to see more of. And honestly, that is the kind of leader I am committed to becoming. Because I certainly am not saying any of this from a pedestal. I'm saying it as someone who is learning as well. I'm saying it as someone who wants to hold powerful spaces with deep care and respect. I'm saying this as someone who believes that deep work should be matched with deep responsibility. And as someone who has seen what happens when the container fails. And I want better. I want better for clients and for coaches and for women and for men and for the coaching industry, because transformation is sacred. People's stories are sacred. Their trauma is sacred. Their trust is sacred. And if someone trusts you enough to let you guide them into the tender places that are going to cause positive movement for them, please do not take that lightly. Do not treat it like content. Do not treat it like proof that your method works. Don't treat it like a testimonial waiting to happen. Treat it like a human being opened something in your presence, because that is what happened. And if you're not prepared to hold that with care, then you have no business leading people there. That may be the most important thing I say in this whole video. If you are not prepared to hold people with care, you have no business leading them into the places where they need care. So, to the coaches and healers and guides and facilitators and mentors and leaders watching this, please take your containers seriously. Define them, structure them, clarify them, protect them, repair within them, know your scope, honor confidentiality, create integration, do your own work, notice your own projections. And when you get it wrong, because you will sometimes get it wrong, have the humility to repair. You don't need to defend. You don't need to make the client responsible for your discomfort. And to the clients, students, and participants watching this, remember that your discernment is important. Your safety matters. Your questions matter. Your body's no, the no that you feel is important. Your discomfort is important. Listen to that. You are allowed to leave spaces that do not feel safe. You are allowed to ask for clarity and to expect confidentiality and to expect care. And you're allowed to say, this does not feel aligned anymore. You're allowed to remove your endorsement from work and from people you no longer trust. You are allowed to protect the parts of you that were brave enough to open, because your healing matters too much to be handed over to sloppy leadership. Yeah. So let this be the reminder. Being able to open someone is not the same thing as being able to hold them. Depth without structure in your container is not safe. Making someone cry or, their tears during a session does not automatically mean healing. A coaching container is not just a Zoom link and a transformation promise. And you cannot use trauma as a doorway and then abandon people in the room. If this conversation resonated with you, I'd love for you to share it with someone who needs to hear it, whether they're a coach, a client, a facilitator, a healer, or someone learning how to trust their own discernment again. And if you are a visionary woman building a business, creating a body of work, and learning how to hold your own power with integrity, make sure you subscribe, because this is the kind of conversations we have here. We talk about the inner work, the leadership work, the money work, the business work, and the spiritual work of becoming the kind of CEO who can actually hold what she is building. And if you're going to lead people somewhere deep, please make sure you know how to bring them back home. That's it for today, my friends. Thank you so much for being here. You're a treasure. Bye.